I'm Chuck. This is What is the Wheel? And today I'm going to try and make this fit this. Today I'm going to try and set up a throttle cable to make this pedal work with that carburetor. I got these pedals off of Amazon. I was going to make my own originally, and I got to looking into it and saw these things and saw how cheap they were. They're like 50 bucks for a pair. They got a brass bushing. They're machined aluminum. They got a bunch of locations that you can put your pickup point in. They have a stop on them. They got a kind of a cool looking, pedal. So I figured, why not? We'll go ahead and get those and give them a try. The first problem is this hole is 3/8 and the frame is drilled for a 5/16. Now I could drill it out for a 3/8 hole and then just run a bolt in this, but if I do that, I'm compromising the frame to some extent because you're starting to drill a pretty big hole in there. It's only a 1-inch tube, so you don't want to put too big a hole in there because everywhere you drill a hole, you're making the frame weaker. So what I'm going to do is make some spacers and see if I can make the 5/16 bolt that it took originally work with this larger diameter. With what I have in the shop, I have 3 material options. I've got steel, I've got aluminum, and I have Delrin. I'm going to use the Delrin because it's self-lubricating, and quite honestly, it's way easier to work with. The Delrin is super easy to machine, and compared to, even the aluminum's easy to machine also, but steel in particular is a lot tougher. I think the aluminum will be a little grabby, and I think the Delrin will provide a nice, slick surface for the pedal assembly to work on. So I'm going to cut basically some top hats out of the Delrin to fit the pedal to the frame. Before we start cutting the part, we need to figure out what size the part needs to be. So we've got our pedal assembly here. We've got our little digital mic here. We'll run it down on there and we'll see, what are we at there? Reading it backwards in the thing, 0.988. So right at 1 inch. So it's just under 1 inch. And then we need to figure out our bore size here, which comes to, it shows up on there, about 394. Which, to be honest, I can't translate that to fractions. It's 3/8 of an inch, right at it. I got that by simply taking a drill bit, which I know the size of, and sticking it in there to see what the size of the hole was. That's sometimes that's the easiest way to do stuff. It's a little hard to see what's going on here, but what I've done is chuck the Delrin into the chuck, and I have put a mark on there at slightly over 1 inch. And what I'm going to do now is just turn the lathe on and make a line using the lathe so that I know my stop point. And then I'm going to start lathing this piece of Delrin down so that I can get it to the size that I want it to be. I'm not going to show this whole thing because it's pretty boring. Basically what I'm going to do is get my tooling in the position. I'm going to add a little depth of cut. I'll turn on my lathe, and then I'm just going to let it auto cut. This thing power feeds. And I could actually feed more than this probably with Delrin, but I'm not in any kind of big hurry, and I'm not going to make y'all watch me for the next 20 minutes while I cut this thing down to the size that I need. I'm basically just going to cut it right down to my line that I marked initially. And once I get it down there, I'll cut the power feed off. If I have to do any final finish, I'll do that by hand. I'll back the feed off slightly, pull the cutting tool back out of the way, and then start again with my next cut. And I'm just going to do that over and over again until I have it the size I want. I'm going to cut the outer diameter first because I want this thing as solid as possible. Once I have my outer shape to where I want it, then I'll cut the center hole out. You don't want to do the center hole first, especially with something where you're going to have a pretty thin finish thickness, because it'll be too flexy and you'll get a terrible cut on the outside. And then of course, once we get this whole thing, get this size down, I'm going to flip it around and just use a part tool and part it off to the depth that I want. Now I've got the piece turned around. I'm going to cut this down to 1 inch because that's the size of the frame tubing, and this doesn't need to overhang the frame tubing any. All right, now I'm going to pilot this using this pilot head right here. This will ensure that I get in the center when I run the drill through it. Turn it on. Just going to crank it in there and create a center point. Now I can run a drill bit through it. All right, I've run into a problem, which I've talked about in the past, of like order of operations. I drilled this out from the other side. This larger end was out and it was clamped by this. Well, as I drilled through this, it got thinner and thinner to the point where it had no grip. So it started spinning the part, and you can actually see some texturing on this part right here. So I have turned it around. I'm going to attempt to drill it from now, but I have a feeling I have, caused myself a problem. I'm probably going to have to start over again with make a whole new piece, because A, because of the texturing on this, and B, because I don't think the drill bit is going to center on this anymore. So what I should have done was cut my piece to size, cut the whole thing to 1 inch, then necked this down to the correct size, and then drilled it. That would have been the correct way to do it. All right, I got it off of the lathe. I cut it down, cut it to 1 inch diameter, trimmed it back so it wasn't so thick. Used this little sanding wheel here, or sanding drum, to give it a little bit of a rounded shape so it'll fit to the frame better. And not the greatest work ever, but it might do the job. So now we have another issue. There is not a whole lot of clearance here. We've got this weld in the way here. This thing is not going to fit. It fits on the frame pretty nice, but it's not going to go over far enough. So I'm going to have to clearance it some more to clear this weld. The bolt is going in here super tight, and because that hole must have been drilled before they put all of this stuff in here, before they welded this tube on, because my drills do not fit in here. So I'm going to probably like deburr this a little bit, because the bolt does not. This is a 5/16 bolt. Even it doesn't want to go through these holes. I'm thinking maybe originally that they ran the bolt in from the outside, and they had actually threaded this so that you would thread the bolt into the frame and then put a stop nut on it on this side. So, but I don't know, because like I said, when I got this thing, it was just a frame. That's all I had. There were none of these other parts were on here. And don't pay attention to any of what's going on right here. That's for another episode. To clearance this out for the weld, I just put it on this cheap Central Machinery belt sander from Harbor Freight, who is not paying me any money. All right, we sort of kind of got step one, getting the pedal in place on here. We've got it. I've got my Delrin bushing in there. I've got the bolt in place. I've got a lock nut on here, which unfortunately the bolt is a little on the short side, so I'm going to have to get a longer bolt. This Delrin piece actually is better than I had hoped it would be. It doesn't have very much slop in it, which is so thin it could hardly have any slop in it anyway, because it's basically just a tiny layer of Delrin between the bolt and this brass piece right here. But it feels pretty good. A little bit longer bolt, which will allow me to keep some slack in there so that it moves a little more freely, because it has got a little bit of drag to it. And so that's pretty much step one here. Now that the throttle's installed, I got to do something to get back here to the carburetor. I could just run cable and housing the entire way, but I don't really like that idea. I want to use a rod that's going to hook into one of these holes. Probably have a slight bend in it, come straight back. And there's a bracket on the cart already. It's got a little cutout in it here. I can run the rod through this, and I have an idea for something I'm going to do with that. And then at this point, I'll put a stop in, and I should be able to do that like right here. This is already drilled, and so I might be able to create like a shape that'll have a stop, and then the cable will run from here up to the carburetor. So let's start working on that, because I've got a 5/16 rod and these holes are 1/4, so I'm going to have to neck that rod down. I've got the rod chucked up in the lathe. I've got the whole length of the rod in here, so the rest of it's running way over there. It does just spin fine. It's not wiggling all over the place, so this should work. I'm going to cut this as 5/16, so I'm going to cut it down to approximately 1/4, which is the size of the hole in the throttle. I've got the end of the rod necked down, and the lever, or throttle lever, throttle pedal fits onto that nice and good. And I just need to drill a hole through the center for a pin. I didn't have a throttle cable handy, and it would have taken a couple of days to order one. And so this is a derailleur cable for a bicycle. It's a stainless steel 1.1 millimeter cable. It's got this correct shape end. The problem is it's too big. So I ground it down to fit. And it fits right in here perfectly. Got my throttle lever installed. I have turned it around. I haven't decided if I'm going to orient it this way or the other direction with this pedal over this way. I kind of like this because it gives me a little more leg room. But I have taken the rod. The rod has been machined down. I drilled it out for a cotter pin. There'll also be a washer on there as well. Bent it. Let's see, here we go, get an angle there. Brought it down, bent it so it's more or less down, and then parallel with the frame tube. It comes back to here where it fits through this piece that was a little weld piece that was already on the frame, which almost looks like it was meant to fit there. And then right here I've got a grub screw in the end of this rod because I have drilled, through drilled the rod. What do they call that? Rifle drilling or whatever. And here we have a piece of cable, and the cable, which has some dirt on it, let's knock that off before we shove that in there, slides right into here, and then the grub screw tightens up against the cable. So that's about as far as I've got time to make it today. The next episode, I'm going to add a bracket that's going to come straight back and then up. It'll have an adjuster on it. The cable's going to run through that, and that'll allow us to take out our slop and do some fine adjustment. In addition to what's on the car, you can adjust on the carburetor, take tension out of the, or put tension in the throttle cable. And then right here, what I'm probably going to do, this thing is angled slightly, and it appears to be welded on right there, but I'm going to make, I believe, a little fitting or a foot, and I'm going to put a spring on here, and that spring is going to be a compression spring, and as you apply the throttle, it's going to compress that spring, and it'll act as a return spring. And so I'll have a piece made up to fit here and to fit into this little hole. I might have to open that hole up a little bit for that. I'm going to machine a collar to act as a spring stop right here, and then I'm probably going to make another collar for this side that's going to act as a throttle stop for to keep the pedal from coming back too far. I could do it up at the pedal, and maybe that's where I'll end up doing it, but I kind of like the idea of doing it right here. It'd be pretty easy to make. So that's about all I got for today. I do have the throttle cables dangling out of the carburetor. This, I did it to check travel to see how far this needed to move. This only needs to move about an inch to go from idle to full throttle. Well, it looks like I didn't finish it today. I planned to get it all done, but then I got a chance to go to a motorcycle demo, so I spent my morning riding a bunch of motorcycles around the countryside instead of working on my video footage. But, you know, that's how it goes. This is what happens when you're watching me go through this steps of like figuring out how to do this, because quite honestly, I don't have any real reference for this. A lot of times I don't go back and try and look at what other people have done, or go take a deep dive into it. I just go from what I remember, which is maybe not the smartest way to do it, but this is turning out pretty good. So hopefully next week we'll finish it up. Everybody like, subscribe, please leave a comment, and ring the bell so you'll know when my next fantastic video comes out. Everybody have a great day.